Welcome to the start of a very important day for Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences. Thank you very much for coming, visitors and of course staff. It's a great way to start the day by inviting Dr. Robert Gagosian, currently the Chief Executive of Consortium for Ocean Leadership. Ocean Leadership was actually formed through the merger of the Consortium for Oceanographic Research and Education, CORE, and the Joint Oceanographic Institute, JOY, back in 2007. But previously, Bob was the director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He held that position from 1994 to 2006, and was a practicing marine geochemist, particularly organic geochemist, which included a role as the chairman of the chemistry department at WHOI. He is the co-author and author of over 85 scientific papers and has mentored PhD students and postdocs throughout his career. He is a native of New England from Massachusetts, did his first degree at MIT, and then went on to do his PhD at Columbia University in organic chemistry in 1970. Since then, Bob is extremely respected around the world, been a faculty fellow of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland for 3 years, served on many important scientific advisory panels, including the US Commission on Ocean Policy, and is an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. I was particularly intrigued by his title of being elected a fellow of the Explorers Club in 2006, and also received the Champion of the Oceans Award from Monmouth University. So I've got to know Bob really quite well since I joined Bigelow Laboratory back in 2008, particularly through the work of Ocean Leadership. Bigelow Laboratory is a member of Ocean Leadership, along with all the other primary oceanographic institutions and universities across the nation. So it's a great pleasure to welcome him today, and he's going to talk to us about oceanography amongst the fiscal cliff. You picked the time. You're a very brave man. So welcome, Bob Gagosian.
Thank you. It's a real privilege to be here. What a gorgeous facility. But you know, I mean, when are the scientists going to come and hear my talk? Who are all you people all dressed up? Jackets and ties and attractive. I mean, that's amazing to me. I've never seen such a group of people. We don't get this in Washington. But it really is a pleasure to be here. As I said, this is such a gorgeous facility. I'm in a way somewhat jealous as an administrator. It sort of wants me to take off my jacket and tie and put on my jeans and see if I can find a lab. You know, it's, you're very fortunate, as I'm sure you're all very well aware. As you know, I want to introduce some realism today. I don't want to be a downer on this wonderful day, but I want to introduce some realism and to get you to maybe be thinking outside the box a little bit. You have an opportunity here in Bigelow to do that a lot of people don't have in a lot of big universities, because there's so many layers of structure. And you've got a very innovative director here who's looking for new ideas and new ways to go. So I want to throw out some ideas to you and for you, but I want to lay the groundwork, which is a little bit depressing, okay? But I don't want to be depressing. I want to be realistic. And I think it's very important to be realistic, because, quite frankly, sticking your head in the sand is not going to get anybody anywhere. And so I talked to the board about this particular subject, and I want to talk to you about it this morning, more in the context of your laboratory and as you as the scientists and staff of this institution. So lots happening in Washington. There's no question it's having an effect on research, and probably many of you already know that from the grants that you've sent in and you're waiting to hear, or you've already heard. And so what I want to do is give you my perspective on what I would consider the challenges ahead in this whole fiscal cliff environment. and whether we reach it or not, it's the environment of the fiscal cliff. Even if it's solved, we'll still be close to it because of where we are as a country. So I would suggest to you that these challenges associated with the fiscal cliff are your challenges because you're involved in it. So I want to set the framework for what, and this is a personal belief, of what I think is going to happen in Washington over the next several years. And how, in many ways, it's going to affect each and every one of you. Okay? And how the institutions and you as laboratory people, scientists, how you're going to have to think, I think you're going to have to think differently to navigate through this minefield. And some of you are already doing that. And really to take advantages of the opportunities that exist. So even though times are going to be tough, there are opportunities, but you have to keep your eyes and ears open and cherry pick them, if you will. So make no mistake, I believe this is a really big paradigm shift. And when I finish laying out the framework, I think you'll agree. So what I want to do is lay out the framework and then make some suggestions on how we can manage and navigate through this different framework. So let's start with the election in November 2010. A lot of changes occurred. It was when the shift in the House of Representatives went to the Republican majority, and it occurred along with the recognition of this increasing rise in the U.S. debt. And if you will, from that, the funding outlook for scientific research in this country really completely changed. And it wasn't just that the Republicans took the House, and there's been changes all along between Republicans and Democrats. It was that there were a group of people that came in that actually didn't like government, and they wanted to downsize government significantly. Well, many of you, most of you are funded by the United States government. So that has a big effect on you. So this group of freshmen, if you will, they were really set on an agenda of deficit cutting and most importantly, not compromising. And that's a big issue because that's how Washington works. And as you all know, it's why your senator retired this year. She has stated many times that one of the reasons is she's so disappointed. Well, you know, so disappointed that compromises seems to be gone out the window in Washington. So this last election, if you will, election of 2010, not the one just recently, but that basically suggested not only who controls the House, but the attitude towards solving the nation's problems. In other words, it's the attitude. You've all read it in the newspapers. Now, currently, the Senate is controlled by the Democrats 55 to 45. And that includes 2 independents who are voting with the Democrats. However, you know, they really, if you've read the papers, they really haven't challenged the House on the budget issues, even with the new election. And, you know, we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. But if you probably noticed that Harry Reid is not part of the discussion with Obama and Senator Warren. So, I mean, Congressman Boehner. So, there's a very different dynamic here. The other thing I want to lay out for you is in 2014, the Democrats are going to have to defend 21 of the 33 seats that are up for election. So the Senate could flip. It depends. So things aren't going to change much for a while. In other words, we've got to deal with what we're going to deal with now. So what I think is going to happen as of today is it looks like several years of level funding at best for NSF and NOAA and NASA to a large extent with respect to the science program. But it could be worse if there are substantial cuts to the president's portion of the ocean budget. And you know, NOAA budget, as you probably know, for 2013 is not good for NOAA. The wet side gets hit pretty hard, mostly because of the Weather Service and the satellite issues. So I want to emphasize that this doesn't, tell you some more than the good news, this doesn't include the budget cut of approximately 8% if the sequestration goes through. But we're hearing some good news on that the president wants to take research off the table with respect to sequestration discussions if we actually do have the fiscal cliff. I don't believe that's going to go forward. And if it does go forward, it's going to be short term because no party wants to be at risk, if you will, of being accused of taking their country into a recession. So I think they're going to come to some solution on that. It could be very painful for the first few months, But remember, we're in a continuing resolution anyway to the end of March, which means we're operating on roughly a 90% basis of what was spent in 2012. Okay? So I personally don't believe that that's going to be a major crisis for research. But you know, even a 2-3% cut, as you know, with science, inflation means a 5, 6, 7% cut. So that means new grants and contracts. There's not much money available for that because there's continuing grants. So it could potentially be painful, but not a disaster. Okay. And so I think we're all hoping that some saner members of Congress are going to prevail, and that we don't actually go through that. I think I want to mention here is, you know, you keep reading in the paper, well, you know, Boehner says something, the president says something. Don't pay attention to that. I mean, the fact that they're talking and they're not saying anything substantive to the press is good news, because it means that there are confidential negotiations going on, and anything of that level, they're not going to tell anybody about it, because they've got to build a political support within their parties to actually make it happen. So I personally feel that there are some serious discussions going on. The question is, you know, who's going to blink first, and who really wants to come back for Christmas vacation from their Christmas break, if you will, on the Hill, and actually work through that. So the heat's up, and that's probably not bad news. I mean, it's the way things are done in Washington. If you haven't seen the movie Lincoln, go see the movie Lincoln. And you can see exactly, if you think it's bad now, and you haven't seen Lincoln, go see Lincoln. And you'll see what it was like then. So it's just politics as usual. Not much has really changed. Matter of fact, it's a little more civil, if you can believe it. So what this scenario is required for us in ocean leadership and representing the communities, the ocean community in Washington, is to really be front and center with the federal agency budget discussions and on the Hill, especially with the appropriations committees. And we're very active in doing that. And we have a group of people that actually participate in that, and we go to the Hill with people like Graham and the leaders of the various institutions and universities around the country, because that's who they really want to hear from, because they represent you, the people that are actually doing the research. And we're going to need to continue to do this. And so my focus is very heavily on this right now. I spend a lot of my time doing this and trying, you build relationships and trying to, by the way, you might find this very interesting. People complain a lot about problems in Washington. The biggest commodity for success in Washington is trust. It's your word. And if your word is not trusted, they don't want to talk to you. And that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because when you read about all the stuff that goes on in Washington, you think it's all skullduggery. But it isn't. It's really, I mean, our credibility is totally based on the fact that what we give Congress and we talk to Congress about is fact. And it's not speculation. It's what the community really wants and what we can do and can't do. Like, we can't predict climate change tomorrow morning, and we can't predict the ice melting when it's going to melt completely in the Arctic. But there's data that can show where one can maybe talk about what's going to happen, predicting in 2030, 2040, and 2050, and what the range is. And that's what they like. That's what is very, very important to me. So this is, I mean, I want you to understand that this is really serious business. And it's a very critical time, I believe, for our community and for all of science. And so that's why we're up there. But let me come down a little bit now and talk about the specific dollar issues, okay? So, 2012 budget for NSF was actually pretty good. It was a 3% increase. NOAA was relatively flat. For fiscal 13, if the budget actually goes through, the House provided a $300 million increase for NSF and over fiscal year 12, and the Senate provided $240 million. So that's not bad. That's real money. It's new money, and if you consider the fact that the NSF budget is around $7 billion, $6 to $7 billion, depending on how you want to count, $300 million is 4%. That's pretty good. What's particularly important, and I want to emphasize this to you in the Senate bill, is it included language that aimed to protect the core science funding, you all. And that's something we have worked very hard on. You've heard a lot about the one NSF that the director of NSF has been pushing lately. And And that's across directorate programs. The problem is that requires new money, and there's not a lot of new money, so therefore the core budget gets taxed to fund that. Now that's all going out the door too, but it's going out in a different package. And the individual budgets, for instance in ocean sciences, would get cut to provide support for that. So we've been on the Hill saying, look, the one NSF proposal is really good, there's a lot of interesting science there, but don't support that at the expense of the core budgets. And let's share a little bit across the board. Maybe the one NSF initiatives can't go forward at the rate that they want to go forward. Maybe it has to cut back a little bit so that the core budget is protected over time. But I wanted you to know that that's something that we support very heavily and have been out there protecting. And it's hard to protect core budget, because it's the core. Congress wants to fund new initiatives. They want to just fund same old, right? And they don't really recognize that these new one NSF initiatives would never come about if there wasn't exciting science in the core budgets that came through. So what we've done is we've brought this attention, as I said, to the attention of the Appropriations Committee staff in balancing this. Now, the other thing to remember, and I think this is a big issue, and we don't know how this is going to play out yet, but remember in the stimulus, that NSF got $3 billion, and their budget was $6 billion, so that's pretty good. $1 billion went for infrastructure, and that went to finish building the Sukuliak, the Alaskan research vessel. It went towards starting the Ocean Observatories Initiative. It went towards keeping the scientific ocean drilling program going. And it went, $2 billion, though, went for research that you all get, okay? And the research budget at NSF is $5 billion. That was a $2 billion increase. That's a 40% increase. It's huge. So that was the good news. The bad news is it's gone. It's 2012, ladies and gentlemen. And that money came in 2009, in September 2009. And many people got 3-year grants from that. And you may not even know whether you got it or not, because you submit to NSF, you might have submitted to the regular programs at NSF, but the stimulus went into that. Well, that's gone. So the success rate at NSF went from 21% to 32% because of the stimulus. But that's gone now, so it's going to go back down. And I personally think that's a bigger issue than sequestration, because that's 40% of the money that's gone. And the NSF budget hasn't gone up a lot. So how those people can get funded? So again, one has to be realistic about, so what does that mean? Well, it means the success rate's going to go down, is what it means. And so how was one going to accommodate that in one's own, let's go right to the laboratory level. Okay, with you and visiting investigators, your students that come in the summers, or whether you have a program, a joint program with some graduate students from other institutions, and your laboratory technicians and the staff in your lab. So what does that mean? It means things are going to change. I also want to remind you that in NOAA, in fiscal year 13, their budget went up, the House put up $70 million, but there's another $55 million for satellites. But the problem is that the satellite budget went up so much, the $200 million, that the wet side's going to get hit. And if you look at the 2013 budget, it really gets whacked hard if that happens. And so we're up there trying to rebalance that. But it's a hard rebalancing act because, as you know, the satellites are getting older, and we're not going to have an ocean color satellite. I mean, this is a serious issue. This nation has done a miserable job in managing and putting together its strategy for long-term satellite observations, whether it be for weather, for ocean science, whatever. It just has done a terrible job, and we've got to turn that around. So what, what does all of this lead to? And this really pretty picture I've laid out for you. Well, I want to add a couple of bright spots. As I said, I think that the recognition that science is important, especially from the President's point of view. There's a lot of support on the Hill for science. That's good news, okay? We've got the National Ocean Policy in place, albeit there hasn't been a lot of funding for it, but the President got reelected and it's his initiative. There's significant new funding going into the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going in, and it's not just going into the Gulf of Mexico because of the oil spill. It's transcending broader. There's the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative, which is a brand new program of $50 million a year for 10 years. Okay, the first 3-year funding is underway. There's the fines for the criminal charges. Many of you probably, if you've read about the criminal charges, it was $4 billion. $350 million went to the National Academy of Sciences to put together a program to develop new engineering issues for safety, but also for observing. And we've been talking with them about not just the Gulf, but what about Alaska? What about our coastal zones? And there's a lot of other areas where oil is drilled, if you will, and gas is drilled, and gas is delivered in the LNG tankers. So what about that? And so that's $350 million of new money that's going to go out the door in the next 10 or 15 years. And then there's the Clean Water Act fines, and that's going to be between $100 and $500 million that will go to research. That hasn't been settled yet. That will probably be settled over the next couple of years. Well, these are big numbers I'm talking to you about, and big opportunities. I mean, the NSF budget for ocean science is $350 million. 175 is infrastructure. That's 175 that goes out every year to people like you. And I'm talking about $50 million from BP every year for 10 years, $350 million, so that's like $35 million from the Academy, and then another, who knows how much, from NOAA, from the $100 to $500 million from the Clean Water fines, Clean Water Act fines. So that's a lot of new money that will go out the door, and we're pushing really hard that it goes beyond the Gulf, but actually understand ecosystem processes for restoration, not just there, but all around the United States, the coastal zones of the United States. So, I mean, quite frankly, that's a bright picture because it's significant money. So, let me step back. That's the framework. Now, how do we plan, or how do we predict? And what I want to do is I want to lay out for you 5 factors that mean we've got to change. First, $16 trillion federal deficit and the attention it's getting, as I mentioned to you. Who knows what's going to happen with the Bush tax cuts? It makes it a bigger problem, if you will, because if the taxes, I mean, I think the plan is obviously raise the taxes on the wealthy, cut the taxes on the middle class, or keep it the way it is. Well, that costs the government money if you keep the taxes the way they are and don't raise them for the middle class. Not that I'm suggesting that the government raise your taxes. You don't want them to raise my taxes either, right? But, I mean, it's fact. If they don't raise the taxes, the deficit continues to go up. The money's got to come from somewhere else. And as you know, there are considerable political obstacles to tackling this whole entitlement issue. But it's got to be tackled, okay? You can't solve a deficit problem by just cutting the discretionary part. They can cut the whole discretionary part. Don't fund any science. You can't even come near solving the deficit problem by doing that. They got to go after the entitlements of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security is sort of a separate issue because it's funded differently. And we have a new Congress, and you know, it's going to take some leadership to get up to speed. And I think the good news is that with the re-election mostly in the same on the leadership, that things are going to continue to move forward. And you know, there's still a fairly strong problem with respect to what I would consider the Republicans, who are very much work on consensus, in dealing with people, some of the people in their party who are not interested in consensus. I think it's better now than it was in 2010, but it's still an issue, and you read about this in the paper. Boehner's trying to get his people on board. But the fourth part is this, as I said, this extremely difficult budget situation. And in a way, you're fortunate in your institution because you don't depend on a heavily state budget. I mean, the state's universities, you read about this. I mean, I'll give you an example. The University of Washington, which is the biggest university in the country with respect to research dollars, mostly because of the Applied Physics Laboratory and their medical school, their state support for their budget has been cut 50% in the last 5 years. 50%. And they've replaced it by new federal funding. But as I said, the federal funding is going to be flat. So what are they going to do? you don't have to worry about that because you don't have significant state support. So that's the good news, in a way, right? You're not dependent on that. And so that's one issue that you don't have to worry about. And fifth is this difficulty in raising the federal taxes, as I said, that we've been hearing about, and trying to balance the government costs. So, what these factors all add up to is several years of flat, no increases for science, but really flat. And it's sort of the unprecedented synthesis of all these. I've never seen anything like this all coming together. The deficit is a big one. The realization of the deficit is there. Means that it really affects ocean sciences in more of an acute way because, as you know, the infrastructure costs for ocean sciences are high. I mean, you've got coastal vessels, you've got your laboratories, you've got this new facility. I mean, all of this means, more money. And so the at-sea infrastructure and the sophisticated instrumentation that we use in our field exacerbates that. Okay? And it means the operations and maintenance costs are high and continue to go up. And that's somewhat disconcerting. So as I said, I've read, this is a rosy picture, nice day, beautiful day, and here I am. I show up and say, well, I've got my sword here and I've got a black hood I'm going to put over my head and walk around. But I'm telling you this because it's reality, and I'm a very pragmatic person, and the culture I came from was a very pragmatic culture in the Middle East, and deal with it. And so we got to deal with it. And I think if we deal with it while others are wringing their hands, then we're in a much better position. Okay? So what I'm suggesting to you that we could continue with the same approach of the last 75 years and competing against each other, for ownership of infrastructure or whatever, and wanting the best of everything rather than really making strategic education and research decisions and as institutions and focusing. And I think that that's not a formula for success. Okay? And I think you here have a real ability because you're small and you're private. You can really make a difference and make a change where other institutions can't, that are big and encumbered and have state issues and regents and et cetera, et cetera. Your destiny is in your hands. And I would suggest to you that there's no point in being private if you don't take advantage of that. You can be flexible. Now, it can be painful, but you can be flexible. And you can change in a way that other institutions cannot change. So I suggest that if places like you don't change, it's almost a formula for the slow death of our field. I mean, you can lead it in a way that other places can't. And I don't think any of us want oceanography to be a backwater science, especially when the research is so needed today for the problems that we read about every day in the paper. I mean, all of a sudden, everybody's talking about climate change again because of Hurricane Sandy. Who knew, right? I mean, gee, it took a sharp left turn. Hello? Yeah. I mean, that's what models are about. That's what data is about. I mean, you've got to have the observations. So I think that people realize that, and I think that we need to take advantage of it. I'm basically, as you probably could see, sense, an optimist, and I really feel that if one accepts the situation, and we got to accept it and move on. In other words, as a community, we have to stop whining about the problems and the good old days, and realize, today is the first day of the rest of our lives, right? And I can say that in a place like this because look at this place. I mean, you move in here, and I mean, you've got to be thinking, what happened to me? Look at this. Wow. Right? So it's the first day of the rest of your life. So then let's take a look at, maybe I'll throw out some ideas of how one might want to move forward. And these may not be applicable to all of you or in many ways to Bigelow, but they're just ideas about how to do things in a different way and deal with this. And the ideas are in three different areas. They're in focused research areas, laboratory infrastructure, and at-sea infrastructure. And they apply in various ways. And to think about going different directions. So, as I said, they're only suggestions, though. But I want to get you their ideas, and I want you to start thinking as a group about some of these ideas and different directions that you might want to take. And, you know, one idea is for institutions to agree ahead of time that they're going to partner in different ways with other institutions where there are experts in certain areas here and there are experts in certain areas in other institutions. And what you're going to do is you're going to partner. You're probably already doing some of that now. What I'm suggesting to you that it needs to be enhanced. Because in that way, you don't have to have everybody here, right? And they don't have to have everybody there. And so by partnering, you take advantage of the skill base of the other organizations. And this is, again, I think easier to do here than other places. And I think you could be, Bigelow could be a leader in thinking about what areas of research you feel your institutions can be best at. And obviously you're focusing very heavily on microbial oceanography. And that's a hot topic now, it will be a hot topic in the future. And I would encourage you to enhance that. And I always believe that when you have an organization like this, you have a core, okay? Now, you can expand the core or you can start bringing in satellites. I would recommend not bringing in satellites because then they form fiefdoms. But if you have a core and then you bring in people that have 1 foot in the core and a foot outside the core, guess what? Keep bringing in people like that, the core expands. And the partnership expands. And so you've got the microbial oceanography initiative. I suggest you move on that and expand on that. And maybe you and I don't know your entire makeup of research here, but maybe there are climate people that are interested in diseases, right, that are brought on, and microbial diseases that are brought on by climate change. And some of these, of course, the vectors are stopped in the ocean. Well, there's an area that one might want to think about expanding with 1 foot in the core and 1 foot outside the core. And in this budget, in this whole budget environment, I think this exercise could be really very important. The partnership, I think, can also go further in education realms, and you have an opportunity here, obviously, for the summer. And when I was at Woods Hole, we had started a summer student fellowship program earlier on, and it was just a whole boom. Because guess what? They go back to their undergraduate schools in the summer and tell them, all their fellow colleagues and friends, what a great summer they had. Well, come on, great summer here? Give me a break. I mean, so you have a location opportunity that a lot of other places don't have. And I would suggest you think broadening along those lines as well. And my guess is there'll be a lot of people, donors that might want to help in that particular area, because who doesn't like to help young people succeed, right? I mean, that's a real, and they can become your ambassadors as they go back to their undergraduate schools and go on to graduate school and on to careers. Because that's what you're talking about here, is building not only your capacity inside, but your capacity outside. And so I think that's an area that would be very helpful. I would also suggest, I want to move on with respect to the idea of laboratory infrastructure and developing centers of excellence. You know, one thing that I had trouble with, and I want to give an example, because I like to give examples. So when I first started at Woods Hole, John Farrington and I got the first mass spectrometer. When I left as director, there were 87 mass spectrometers at Woods Hole, okay? And as department chairman, do you think as chemistry department, I could get 2 labs to cooperate and coordinate and share technicians? Now, everybody had to have their own mass spec. Everybody had to have their own technician. That is not possible now. It's impossible in this budget environment. So why not look at a model like CNRS in France, where they have centers of mass spectrometry? And NIH did this. They had centers of mass spectrometry. They had 8 of them in the United States. And a laboratory within a university would have 20 or 30 of them. But then the technicians all work together. So you have a critical mass. And you know what? You can keep the best technicians when they're working with their colleagues and they know they're at one of the best places. If it's just isolated labs, it makes it very difficult, as you know. Not only to get funding, but they want to talk to their colleagues. So this coordination, whether it be DNA sequencing or whatever, I'm suggesting that instrumentation, you think about instrumentation partnerships within Bigelow or even within other institutions in the area. And I recognize that sometimes it's difficult to do that. But you know, sometimes instrumentation, as you know, is $500,000, $1 million. And if you don't have to pay for the overhead and maintenance for that, you go to another institution to use it, or you have one of those and you bring in people to use your facility, they help pay for the O&M for that. So that's the second area I'd like to suggest that you think about. And there are some successful examples. You know, there's the wave tank facility at Oregon State University, and not everybody needs a wave tank facility. And there's the accelerated mass spectrometry facility that Woods Hole has. It's open to the whole nation, and actually international. So you don't have to have a facility of 15 people running an accelerated mass spectrometer here. But you may need, you want to do some carbon-14 dating. You know, you might have an old piece of clothing or something that you want to find out how old it is, right? And so, I mean, that capability is available. And you know, as I said, it can go into other types of instrumentation, you know, genomic to proteomic, whatever, metagenomic, whatever. And I suggest you think about that. So the third is at-sea infrastructure. And you know, in tight budgets, it's just, fuel is $80, $90 a barrel, and it's harder to get. And 5 years ago, it was $30 a barrel. So it's almost impossible to keep it going. With respect to coastal vessels, doesn't matter whether you have big ships or coastal vessels, the operation and maintenance costs are going up. There's got to be another way to figure out how to do that. At Ocean Leadership, Mark Abbott from Oregon State University we had a working group to look at, and these were big ships all the way down to small coastal vessels. A different way of looking at this and thinking of the fleet as a community resource and partnering. I mean, in New England, why does every marine laboratory have to have all of their own coastal vessels? Maybe there's another way to do this. Okay? Maybe there's a consortium that can be formed. And if people need to have the boat there, well, fine. Then you know, the coastal vessels at one institution for 3 months, another for 3 months, and you change the logo, right? You have this revolving logo. And so they can have their donors come in, you can take them out, right? But there are ways to do this, and it really helps with the operations and maintenance costs. And you get access then to the facilities that maybe you couldn't get access to by just dealing with Bigelow alone. So I want to emphasize this community resource issue. And this particular report also talked about trying to plan on a decadal time frame. We don't do a good job. I mean, as you know, oceanographers, they're really excellent at circling the wagons when there's a difficult time. The problem is they point the guns inward. We have to figure out how to maybe turn a few outward. Because, you know, the oceanographers community is not the problem. The problem is the other parts of the federal budget. It's not even other science. It's the other parts of the federal budget that are really whacking away at us. So we have to think more, I think, in a community aspect. And if we don't, you know, we're not going to have this cutting-edge technology for the future to really make the case for science funding in order for the U.S. to be a leader in the future. So I'm worried that we're moving down that path of not thinking differently. You know, for those of you that have been to China or Brazil or India recently, you see what's happening over there. I mean, they're building significant at-sea and land-based laboratory and human resource infrastructure. China's building right now, two 7,000-meter human-occupied vehicles for deep ocean exploration. And Japan has always had that facility, the Shinkai 6500, that goes to 6,500 meters. You know, we're struggling with Alvin to get a new 4,500 meter. So there will be one. Alvin will be in service by the end of the year. By the end of next year, but I can't believe it's already December. I keep thinking it's spring, you know. Although I was reminded this morning when I walked out from my motel door, it was not spring. I have to tell you, it felt really good. I lived in Woods Hole for 33 years and grew up in Boston, and just the crisp, cool air, it was really nice feeling. So, you know, I want to end with, you know, I realize you might think that we've been in situations like this before, like we're facing now, such as in the early 90s, you know, when many of you may have had Navy funding, when the Navy moved away from blue water oceanography and even coastal oceanography and cut way back to very focused research on like finding mines, mines in the water. But you know, I'm not talking about that situation. That was a situation that changed in research direction. Okay, I'm not talking about change in research direction. I'm talking about a change in the whole funding profile for our science. In addition, you know, in past situations, we weren't starting off in such a hole. I mean, you know, it's difficult funding now, right? And now we're looking at the future. And the ship situation is a classic example. In the past, there was some wiggle room. We don't have any wiggle room right now. So we've got to think, again, of a way to do business differently. And if you look at, if some of you that go to sea on the bigger ships, although there were now private vessels, right? I saw that. I was looking at your website yesterday, and you must have had a lot of fun on that vessel. but you know, that's a different model now, and you know, maybe we need to think about some of those models. Now, I recognize that sometimes it's a little difficult. When I was at Woods Hole, we worked with a extremely wealthy person that wanted to build a submarine for research facilities. Well, one problem is he only wanted to go down 1,000 meters. The other problem is he wanted leather seats in a bar. Which actually I thought was a pretty good idea, you know? Because I was at the time trying to raise $200 million for Woods Hole, and I said, you know, I could use that for big donors now. This would be absolutely perfect. But can you imagine, I know research-wise how that'd work out, you know? But that's another opportunity, you know, looking at these people want to do these kinds of things. Well, maybe we need to look at that. There's a laboratory called Liquid Jungle in northwest Panama that a donor wanted to build, and I got involved in that in my previous life at Woods Hole, and they built a lab down there, and people that are interested in pristine coral reefs and marine mammal research, that was a perfect location because, as you probably know, northwest Panama and just the Costa Rican border is a very clean area. And so didn't have to build that down there. People wanted to work. So there's no one solution, is what I'm saying. There's lots of solutions. So what I'm suggesting to you then is that we really need to learn how to work better together. Have to look at new opportunities as a community, and not as a group of individual laboratories, and maybe even individual investigators. But think outside the box. You know, as I said, we keep hearing from Congress that as a community we don't do more together, and we do need to do that. I think that a laboratory like yours can actually take advantage of this. You can be fleety, if you will. You can be quick on your feet and actually really make a difference out there. You could actually be a model to lead in a way that other institutions really don't have the ability to do that. And you know, one thing that might be kind of fun is that you know, one goal might be for people to say, what is that laboratory in Bigelow up to anyway? Did you notice what they did this and they did that? Maybe we gotta go visit them and see what they're up to. So you have, as I said, I want to encourage you that. And move on this direction. You know, Einstein said that recognizing and facing a problem was 50% of the solution. I think if you recognize where you are, you're halfway there. And as I said, I'm an optimist. I really believe in the idea that a half-full glass attitude in life is much better than a half-empty one. Because if you don't believe in that, you'll spend your whole life being thirsty, right? Because we need water. And I would also suggest to you that in these chaotic times, and let's face it, it is somewhat depressing. I mean, you are going to get letters or phone calls from the agency saying, well, you know, I mean, don't you love this? It's kind of getting honorable mention when you're sent in for merit scholarship. You were ranked very highly, but, and then you look down at your wallet and it's empty. And so that is a bit depressing. But I want to suggest to you something that John D. Rockefeller said. He said this when he was 27 years old. He said, in times of depression, depressing times and chaotic times, there's always opportunity. He was 27 years old. He was broke. He came from a very poor family. He had an idea. The idea was outside the box. The idea was that kerosene lamps could give light at night to the world. It's an interesting idea. By the time he was 35 years old, he controlled 85% of the oil in this country. So a good idea and an optimistic attitude, look what that person did. And if anybody tells you that one person can't make a difference, don't believe them. Each and every one of you can make a difference. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you make a difference. Thank you.
We've got a few minutes. Would you mind taking some questions? Right. Anyone like to fire a few questions at Bob? Yes, please.
You mentioned ocean restoration as one of oceanography's principal aims. How much of the budget is devoted to that? And could you explain a little bit of what is being done?
Okay, where's Stacy? There's Stacy. I'm going to ask Stacy to answer that after I give a short answer.
Just repeat for the people.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the question is with respect, I mentioned restoration. The question was how much funding, what does that mean and how much funding is available for it? There's something called the Restore Act, and the Restore Act is, the numbers are pretty big. They're $5 to $20 billion, and we don't know exactly, and 80% of that is going to go for restoration, and 2.5% is going to go for research, and of the 80%, so it's 2%. And then another 2% is going to go for Gulf Research Centers. But of the 2%, that's where I got the number $100 to $500 million. Okay? Within the BP Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative, if one goes online and takes a look at what the research initiatives are in there, it's all science. But one of the themes is restoration. We don't know yet what the National Academy, how much of that $350 million is going to go to restoration. But certainly a piece of it is. But it's going to all be science. So Stacy Lewis is in our office at Ocean Leadership, and Stacy is a person, one of the people that you would contact if you're coming down to the Hill. And actually, if you want to really learn something about ocean policy, and if you decide that you want to come down to Washington for a few months and spend some time with us, you'll be spending it with Stacy. So.
Hi, everyone. Well, ocean ecosystem restoration is, it's in multiple agencies, and Bob talked about one piece, which is the Restore Act. It's 80% of the Clean Water Act penalties that BP is ultimately going to pay. That's going to go to the Gulf of Mexico. And we are working with NOAA to try to develop their science program so that we help make sure that a lot of money goes out the door, not just for Gulf of Mexico research scientists, but across the country to understand restoration. There are other components of restoration that are moving forward, specifically with the hurricane, Superstorm Sandy. The Senate just dropped a bill yesterday, and we are pushing really hard for the mitigation projects. The administration offered $360 million to go to mitigation, zero for science through mitigation. So we're working really hard to make sure science is part of that restoration piece, because we believe, as you all would be with us on this, that you need science to ensure that restoration has its intended effects. So another component I'd like to bring up is the Office of Response and Restoration in NOAA. And their job is not only to respond to things like oil spills and other natural and man-made disasters in the ocean, but they also do a lot of restoration. And they've been working with us very closely to increase their budget numbers for restoration science. So there's a couple of different pieces throughout the government that addresses ecosystem restoration.
Any other questions? Yes.
I guess I would add to that, you know, here we sit near Portland, Maine, which has one of the largest oil importation points on the eastern seaboard. And that's an area, that's an accident waiting to happen.
No, that's a very good point. The point made was that Portland is a big importer port for oil. And with these, what we're trying to do with all of these programs is get the agencies or the entity to fund understanding processes, not just location. And so what one would learn, you know, whether it's the Gulf, whether it's Portland, whether it's San Francisco, whether it's Alaska, that you want to understand processes. And that's what this whole restoration aspect is about, is trying to understand the process. As you might imagine, the Gulf states would like all the money. And of course, because, I mean, it's always been an economically depressed area, and so it's this is an opportunity for them. And they've gotten whacked time after time. I mean, they got whacked with Katrina, they got whacked with the economy, and then they got whacked with the oil spill. And so they're really trying to get as much of the resources as possible. But for instance, I'll give you an example. Our organization manages the review process, not the decision-making process, but the review process for the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. And the proposals came in from all over the country, and there are numerous states, I think there's something like 27 states, scientists from 27 states that receive funding, the first level of funding from the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. So it's not just all going to the Gulf. And I would encourage you to take a look at that particular website. And there'll be another competition. The competition is in two phases. There's the consortium competition, in which there are 8 consortium that were funded. And the heads of the consortia are in the Gulf, but there are researchers from all over the country that are involved. Then there's the individual competition that occurred just recently. So that's another opportunity. I want to mention one other thing that I forgot. Another thing to think about, which I focused heavily on in my past life, was foundations. There aren't a lot of science foundations, foundations that are supporting science right now. But as I'm sure some of you are aware, and I know that there's someone here that did get one of the Moore Foundation recent awards. The Moore Foundation's Marine Microbial and Microbiology Initiative, the Sloan Foundation's Deep Carbon Observatory, which the Carnegie Foundation is involved with, and then Packard funds various fellowships, and the Keck Foundation. Those are the big ones, if you will. But you know, your entrepreneurs in your science, I would suggest to you, you have to extend out and be entrepreneurs in your business model. Because, as I said, just relying on NSF is going to be a difficult road to hoe in the future. You need to broaden, and you know, you meet new people, you do new things, and there are new opportunities. So I would encourage you individually and institutionally to take a look at some of these founded, and see who got funded, and if they're colleagues of yours, maybe there's opportunities again to partner, like you do with some of your government agency funding.
Okay, I think the gentleman in national dress.
Not to answer my question. I guess a two-part question is, you know, who is administering all the Clean Water Act funds, and you know, what rules are they using? Is it NSF type rules? Are they going out to peer review? So I think you partly answered that by saying your organisation is.
Well, the Clean Water Act, remember, that hasn't been settled yet. BP is claiming, will claim a certain flow rate. And the scientific community is saying another flow rate. And the reason why BP wants a lower flow rate is because the fine is based on how many barrels of oil were spilled. You probably have seen in Science magazine the whole controversy about emails, and the fact that the scientists who was told that we determined, and the engineers that determined the flow rate, all of their emails for the oil spill, for federal agency and non-federal agency funded research, those emails had to be released. And the reason why BP wants those is so they can introduce doubt. And I don't criticize them for doing that because, quite frankly, if I had to pay a fine of $20 billion, I'd kind of like to get it down to $5 billion if I could, especially if my job was on the line. And that's their job. Their job is to produce oil and not spend $15 billion of the company's profits if they don't have to. But this is a nasty game, and it's a legal game, and I want to emphasize to you that the Clean Water Act issue is not a scientific process, it's a legal process. So once that's settled, it depends. I'm going to turn it over to Stacey in a second. In the Exxon Valdez situation, they created an entity that actually gave out the funds. $700 million of research money went out from that, and the North Pacific Consortium was the group that gave that money out for research in Prince William Sound from the Clean Water Act. And Stacey, have they decided how they're going to do that yet? I mean, NOAA's going to do some of it.
Yeah, so 2 points. One, this whole process is being led by Department of Justice. And so the Restore Act was the legislators trying to put a stamp on how they think these Clean Water Act penalties should be spent. But the Department of Justice, I mean, this is a chicken and egg game, right? So the settlement hasn't been reached. The Department of Justice can come out and basically trump the legislation, and then the legislation really should trump the Department of Justice settlement, so that's still unclear. The second point is we can break down the 80% a little bit more. As you can probably guess, restoration is not just in the minds of these states and the federal folks in the Gulf of Mexico. It's not just environmental restoration, but economic restoration. So they've taken large chunks of that 80% and dedicated it to the states for their own decisions on what restoration means. So the other pieces that will go to environmental restoration will be led through a restoration federal task force or council. And that's made up of 12 federal agencies, including EPA, NOAA, Army Corps of Engineers. So there's a variety of federal agencies involved in kind of that restoration piece. And that'll go to shovel-ready type of projects. Then the piece that Bob talked about is that 2.5% that NOAA will manage. And that's the science program. And we're really pushing them to put a large majority of that money out the door to scientists.
I think we've got time for one more. Yes, Nancy, you would like. Yes, cool. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I'm Wendy Flull from the SECO Science Center, where I work informal science education organization. I was interested in your comments about collaboration, because we've had pretty good success working with University of New Hampshire scientists, being kind of the science translators, because we deal with a lot of the public, we deal with a lot of students outside of school. But we don't have access to the science, so we've been working with some scientists, and they found in the past that they had a higher success rate in getting their funding by collaborating with someone who's slightly outside. When you're talking about outside the box, we're outside the laboratory. And I wondered if what your crystal ball would say about thinking about finding different ways, sort of cross that line where education, informal science education, could work with research institutions, if that's something you think would improve funding opportunities.
Yeah, the National Science Foundation, as you probably know, you have to put in your proposals now what the education component is going to be moving forward. I'm really glad you brought that up, because as when we're told, Bigelow has that challenge because you don't have an undergraduate program. And so you've got to be able to explain what's the educational piece. And I would suggest that the informal education piece can actually be very helpful. Or, as I said, I don't know if you have a summer student fellowship program here.
We have a research experience for undergraduate program.
But that's through NSF.
It is, yes.
But maybe a private one, trying to raise some private funds to create a private one. Mm-hmm. There are people that are very interested in young people. And I have to tell you that the Summer Student Fellowship Program, it was a huge success. Not only because you bring in all these 25 really bright people, but because they go out in the world and they talk about your institution. And then they bring in more people, and then they bring in more people, and it just keeps, and you get a lot of research done with it. I had one summer student fellow when I first arrived at Woods Hole. He was from Humboldt State. out in California. He's an undergraduate. And he did such a great job, he stayed on for a year. He went on a cruise with me to South Africa in the Walvis Bay, and we got 3 manuscripts. He decided to go into biochemistry, and he's a biochemistry professor at Yale now. And I'm not saying that experience convinced him, but it certainly helped. And he was great, absolutely great. He gave me a lot of really good ideas. I mean, and it was wonderful to have the graduate students, undergraduates, and the summer student fellows interacting. And I would suggest a place like this could really, because they come and they go. So you're not tied to long-term costs, like a 4-year graduate student or something like that. It goes on and on. I mean, it's difficult, right? I mean, you can get graduate students through other institutions, and I mean, my whole career was built on graduate students. I wouldn't be talking to you if it wasn't for my graduate students. There are MIT professors that are all over the world, Switzerland, etc. at ETH. But the point you brought up about the informal education, that can be somewhat formalized. The other thing I want to mention is we manage the National Ocean Science Bowl, and it's just fantastic to see these kids, these really bright high school students, and that's another opportunity, right? I mean, I don't know if you do anything with the local high schools here, but that's another opportunity to bring them in. And I recognize that they can only do so much because of their knowledge, but there are activities that they can really participate in and really learn from, and then they go off to be undergraduates, and maybe they want to come back. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's a really important part. We tend a lot in this country to focus on graduate students and not, especially in oceanography, and not focus on the undergraduate and the high school level. And I think it's really critical, and it can be very helpful to the people in their laboratories. As I said, I found it extremely valuable.
That'd be a good topic over the lunch as well.
Okay.
So I'm going to bring it to a close there. Please join me in thanking Bob for giving both experience and wisdom.